Item 10B, provide discussion and direction to adopt resolution supporting federal and state gun violence legislation and to identify specific local measures to reduce the risk of gun violence. City Attorney.
Thank you,
Why don't
Mr.
we
Mayor.
wait a
We'll
moment
give it
and let the room
to
clear.
clear the room. For those who want to stay, welcome. Yeah, I got it.
All right, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the audience who are here, and folks at home. So the transition from building possibly a hotel development to gun violence is one of the more awkward transitions that we've had to make at a city council meeting, but I think it just underscores the depth and breadth of what cities do in this day and age. I'll have about a 10-minute presentation with Neil Telford, our Chief of Police here, also available to answer questions. And the first question that the city staff asked itself was, is there anything a city can do to reduce gun violence? And this topic came up certainly by the tragic murder at the Sandy Hook Elementary School, although that was not the first time there was a tragedy involving gun violence. There were certainly other occasions before that we're all very aware of. And so we had a number of individuals and government leaders, Jackie Spear, Dianne Feinstein, City and County of San Francisco, approach the city and say, can anything be done? And if so, what can the city do? And is it possible for the city to make a difference? So that's the question that we're going to pose to you tonight and hopefully make some progress into getting some answers. So there's really three things that cities can do, and we're going to talk about all three of those tonight. One of them is to support ongoing federal efforts, whatever those are, and we'll talk about those in a minute. The second thing is to support ongoing state efforts, and the third is to adopt local measures. And we'll spend a few minutes talking about the first two, and most of the rest of the time talking about the last topic. So what's going on at the federal level? And primarily it's President Obama's very detailed plan, which we've included a summary of in the staff packet. And what it essentially does is calls for two sets of actions, one set that Congress would have to take, another set that could be done by executive order. But in essence, it's universal background checks, support for Senator Feinstein's renewal of the assault weapon ban, a limit on the number of bullets that you can have in ammunition magazines, stronger prosecution for gun crimes, some more research on gun violence because that's been stalled recently over the years, and then possibly some additional funding through the COPS program for cities, although it's not clear exactly whether the city of San Bruno would get anything, or if so, how much. It's important to know that President Obama's plan was supported by a broad coalition of mayors throughout the country. So that's in essence what's going on at the federal level, and at the end of the presentation, I'll ask you if the City Council is interested in adopting a resolution to support that plan. The next question is, what can the city do with respect to supporting state efforts? So we've got a total of 11 bills pending right now. Actually, those are just the ones that were introduced since the beginning of the year. I think there might have been even a couple more introduced in December of last year. Most of those bills, as you've seen in the staff report, are going to further strengthen existing regulations. But those could be anything from requiring additional reporting of ammunition to some additional funding for security guards at schools. So we don't really know how these bills are going to shake out, and we don't know what position cities or the League of Cities is going to take on them. So at the end of the presentation, we'll be requesting that you direct us to monitor those bills and report back to you if there's anything of interest. So what we want to do for the next couple of minutes is spend a little bit of time talking about what can the city do with respect to local measures. And it's important to understand that the city's ability hold on one second while we ask someone to have folks quiet down outside. Thanks. It's important to note that there's sections of state law that limit to some degree what cities can do, and that's primarily in the area of gun licensing and registration. And so there's state laws that say it's the state that decides those issues and cities can't do much about them. However, cities can do a number of things, and so that's what we're going to talk about this evening. Cities can regulate certain types of ammunition, and we'll see that, in fact, in the very next slide. Courts have upheld permit systems that apply to gun dealers, because those are people that are in the business of selling these weapons. And in addition to that, cities have a constitutional power that flows from the state constitution to regulate the location and distribution of businesses throughout their city so that they're located in the best possible places. And then, of course, cities can implement voluntary programs. So we're going to just take a minute and look at each one of these four possible measures. And the first one is additional regulation of ammunition. And this is the San Francisco ordinance that all of you, I think, received a letter from Mayor Lee in San Francisco saying that they in San Francisco are going to recommend an ordinance that does two things. First of all, it would ban the sale and possession of hollow point ammunition. And second, it would require dealers who sell more than 500 rounds at one time to report that to the police department. Well, why would we want to consider those things? Well, the hollow point ammunition is defined in state law as having, quote, enhanced lethality. I don't think I've ever heard that last word before, but I think that means they're really deadly and only intended to kill people. So in the penal code, it's been found that those kinds of bullets really don't have any legitimate purpose for either sport or self-protection, and so that's the reason why they're recommending that those kinds of ammunition be banned. And then second of all, why would anybody care if somebody purchases 500 rounds of ammunition at one time? And I think the answer there is perhaps a little bit more obvious. There's no apparent sporting or home protection purpose as to why you would need 500 rounds of ammunition. So it's the possibility that it would potentially reduce the risk of gun violence in the future if the police department knew of those kinds of purchases. So that's an ordinance that we're being asked to both support and then potentially to adopt ourselves. So the second thing that cities can do, and a number of cities have such systems, Palo Alto, Lafayette, to name a couple of examples, is to have a permit system for gun dealers. And this would apply only to dealers, not to any individuals who seek to purchase weapons. The goal is to ensure that everybody who's involved in the sale or transfer of firearms are, in essence, responsible citizens. So what can we do about that? And first of all, we can have an application and background check. A lot of that's already taken care of by the background check if you're going to be a federally licensed dealer. But more to the point, we want to make sure and have the ability to say that those businesses have to have appropriate security. Some of them do. That they store guns and ammunition safely so people can't get to them unless they're intending to. There's a requirement in some systems that the business have liability insurance. Actually, that's not all that uncommon. In case of accidents, most businesses have liability insurance. Most are mandated by a lease, for example, that you have with the landlord. So that's not an unusual requirement. And we would also propose that if there is such a system, that there would be a hearing available to the owner of the establishment if a permit were denied or revoked. And that's to make sure that the city can correct any mistake it might make in the process. So the proposal here is that the permit system would apply to existing dealers as well. We only have 2 of them. We'll talk about that in a minute. But with a bit of a grace period, which would end up being anywhere between 60 and 120 days. 60 days is kind of the norm. Usually it takes another 60 days to get an ordinance passed, so by the time it would happen, in essence, dealers that are existing now would have 3-4 months in order to apply and go through the checks. So that's what's being recommended for gun dealers. There is one provision in some of the cities in their municipal codes that say that people who have their firearms, that they lose them or if they're stolen, that they should report that to the police. And that's actually an important thing because one of the things we hear a lot is that a lot of gun violence is a result of weapons that are illegal. Well, if you've stolen a weapon, you're not authorized to have it. So that's the sort of thing that we'd want the police department to know about and be able to follow up on. So that's the second thing that we're proposing as far as reducing the potential risk of gun violence. The third thing is for the city to consider using its constitutional zoning powers to regulate uses and where these businesses are. And so any zoning ordinance change would require review and recommendation by the Planning Commission. So what would that involve? Well, right now, under our current code, gun dealers are actually allowed only in the central business district zone, and that's kind of the core San Mateo Avenue zone. Frankly, a bit of an unusual place that you'd want to have gun dealers, but that's what it says. Our two existing dealers that we have, which is Big Five and Golden Gate Guns, are actually located on El Camino, so they're not in the CBD zone, they're in the C zone. So that makes them legal non-conforming uses. And what that means is any change to zoning wouldn't apply to them, it would only apply to new establishments seeking to come in. So here are a couple of alternatives that we're going to ask for some direction on. One possibility is you could direct staff to prepare an ordinance that would prohibit any new dealers. And you'd have to make some findings about that. You'd have to say that, well, the two we have are sufficient. They have secondary effects. We don't really want any more. And that would probably require some further study from staff before we could bring that forward. Another possibility is you could enact a moratorium on new dealers so that you wouldn't have the risk of any new ones coming in absent further study. So that's a possibility. Or staff could explore limiting new dealers to a particular zoning district. As I said, we probably don't want them in the central business district, but we might be okay with gun shops in a different district. So that's something that we could take a look at. Where would that use be most appropriate? Another possibility is that wherever the businesses are located, the new ones, you could require what's called a CUP, a conditional use permit. And that would be to make sure that the businesses address any problems, any secondary effects of being located where they are. And then finally, you could establish what are called proximity limits, and those are pretty common. For example, you don't want to have a gun shop near a school or near a park or near a church, for example, or you want them 1,000 feet away from each other, those kinds of things. So those are pretty common types of zoning mechanisms that other cities have used. The last thing we could do is have some voluntary programs, and you've heard about these in the media. Locally, there's been some gun buyback programs run by both cities and the county. This was one of the efforts that Congresswoman Spear was interested in. These programs seem very well used based on media reports, but funding is an issue, in fact, because they appear to be very well used. So if we look at that, we need to come back to you with some financial information. One suggestion that's been made is to have some sort of an anonymous tip line to report the use of illegal guns, again, sort of focusing on that, and that's worked in a couple of cities. Finally, as Neil can tell you much more about if you're interested, the police department does currently work very extensively with schools and is going to continue those efforts, both with respect to emergency preparedness and, most importantly, to collaborate with people called school safety advocates. And that's a program that's designed to identify youth that's particularly at risk. And so if we can figure out a way to prevent gun violence from starting in the first place, that's something that we want to do, and the police department is certainly making an effort to do that. So finally, what we'd like you to do this evening is tell us whether you'd like us to prepare a resolution supporting the President's plan on a federal level, to monitor the state legislation and come back to you with any recommendations about that, whether you want a permit system that would be part of the municipal code, which would add the ammunition restrictions and or reporting requirements and some of the other things we talked about. Would you like us to draft any amendments to the zoning ordinance? And if so, can you give us some direction about those things? And are you interested in having us look further at some of the voluntary programs like the gun buyback and those sorts of things? So that's what we'd like some direction about this evening. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. And our Chief of Police, Neil Telford, is also here to answer questions too.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments, Chief, before we start?
Just in terms of the schools, we're currently reviewing all school safety plans. We're currently working with all school campuses, both our public schools and our private schools, to make sure that they are prepared, to make sure that their plans are adequate. As Mark mentioned earlier, our school safety advocate program that is very beneficial in identifying youth at risk in our high schools and our middle school. And it's not just San Bruno, it's San Mateo County as a whole. The education community, the emergency response services in San Mateo County are all meeting in April for a school safety summit to get together, to share ideas, and to make sure that we're all on the same page. So we did want to make you aware that we are working with our schools to make a safe San Bruno community.
Thank you. Before we get into comments, I just want to let the council know, I believe I was the first one to bring this before the chief and the city manager. Really concerned me with Sandy Hook, and not just Sandy Hook, a lot of other things that have happened recently from a safety basis. I'm getting really tired, and the people of this country are getting very tired of these fingers of grief. People are killed, 26, 20 little babies, and it doesn't stop there. This grief goes out through thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. Same thing happened to us on a whole different level here in San Bruno. All right, we found out that because of a lack of oversight by higher-ups, the people we think are being taken care of us, the federal government, and especially our own PUC, San Bruno suffered the loss of 8 people. And it wasn't only 8 people, it was all of this grief that we have suffered and the communities around us suffer, and now it's a national thing. The same thing's happening, as I said, in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So whether it be pipeline safety, whether it be gun violence, it has to start, unfortunately, from the bottom up, because it's not happening from the top down. And I think it's up to us as mayors and council people to get that ball rolling, because we are the ones in the local communities that have to live with this. So I think it's really important that we do something. It's not going to cure the problem, but if that one gun that we were to prevent being sold, and that one clip or magazine, whatever you want to call it, was the one that wasn't sold to that fellow's mother that day, that wasn't taken from her house, who knows what could have happened or not have happened. So it's very important to me. We see it on a daily basis. I signed a note of support to the mayors of this country. There's 850 mayors, local mayors, large cities, small cities, that have gotten on board with the United States Conference of Mayors to support the stronger gun violence, gun initiatives, as far as restrictions on what can be sold, and the different types of firearms and different types of magazines. So that's a start, but I think at a local level, I believe we're the first city in San Mateo County that has initiated something like this, and I think it's very important to do a couple things, get behind Mayor Lee in San Francisco and support the resolution that he is proposing. I think that's important. And I would like staff to look at the permitting issues that you mentioned that are possibilities in our town. Maybe some of those things are being done already, and maybe they're not. And I think that's at least a start. There may be some more things down the road with the zoning and stuff. It's going to take a lot longer and a lot more research, but I think with those two first steps, it's very important. And then I'll ask the council for their comments.
Through the chair. This topic, I think, right now, nationally, is a very emotional topic, and just want to take just a really brief second here to kind of take some of the emotion out of that and look realistically at some of the things that were mentioned here and see what effect we could really expect to see out of some of these things. So I just wrote down a few notes, and regarding a limit on the requirement to report 500 rounds. So if somebody purchases 500 rounds of ammunition at a local store, it gets reported to the police department. First of all, are we prepared to follow up on those reports? And if we find that somebody does have 500 rounds, legally, what can we do? Are we in a position where we can say, no, you can't own 500 rounds of ammunition, and can we confiscate that ammunition? Or, I mean, what do we do with that information?
I'll take the last answer, which is no. I'll have the chief talk a little bit about what sort of early warning or detection system it might provide for them to know that somebody's purchased that amount of ammunition.
Okay.
So that Mark's exactly right. So what that would do is it's essentially an early warning system. If the ammunition is legally sold in the city, there's nothing that would prohibit the individual from owning 500 rounds of ammunition. But again, it's just letting that law enforcement agency know that this individual has purchased 500 rounds of ammunition. We would then look and see, is there other recent purchases? Are there any other factors to consider? And is this a warning sign or a warning signal for us to look at other areas and other avenues where we might want to make contact with an individual?
And if an individual was really interested in buying a lot of ammunition, they could order it off the internet, and that would sort of slip under the radar. I imagine there'd be no way to track that.
You're correct that the individual could order it over the internet, and there really isn't a way to detect that. And I think as we go down the road, we're going to have to look into that and see if there's some mechanism that we can't make applicable to our ordinance.
Okay. And again, I hate to sound like a spokesman for the NRA, but one of their arguments is that if you make certain things illegal, legal owners are affected by this. People that abide by the law are affected by this, but those that choose not to obey the law are going to continue doing exactly what they're doing. So I want to make sure that if we do decide to put something on the books, it's not just there to pay lip service to this, but that we're actually doing something that's going to prevent a crime from happening. In terms of the lost gun thing, so somebody has a gun stolen, what do we do with that information?
So that information is entered into a nationwide database. The firearm, the serial number, all of that is entered. So that alerts any law enforcement agency in the country that's running that firearm. That'll let them know this is a stolen firearm. Should an individual go to resell that firearm or, again, in a legal manner, then that would indicate and that would flag that firearm and hopefully get that firearm recovered.
But chances are we wouldn't recover that weapon until it was used in a crime or somebody tried to sell it.
That is possible, or if that individual was stopped by a law enforcement agency, the law enforcement agency would automatically run that firearm, and then that officer would know that that firearm was reported stolen.
Okay, that's a good point there. Okay, is there any data that would indicate that the presence of a gun store in a community leads to a greater chance of gun violence within that community?
Not that, I'm aware that we have had, during my career, we've had two or three burglaries of firearms from gun stores in San Bruno. In one case, that individual was caught, but they were caught in another city with a stockpile of those stolen weapons. The other case, those weapons are some have been recovered, some of them are still outstanding. So it's hard to tell because I don't know what happened to those firearms in the cases where they haven't been recovered and have those been used in a crime, and we just haven't discovered that yet.
Okay. But really, I mean, there would be really nothing to indicate that because San Bruno has two gun stores that we might have more gun violence than other cities. And I don't know what the other cities have, but I mean, we talked a lot about regulating the stores, but again, those are outlets for illegal weapons unless somebody steals them. I think maybe having some requirements, Mark, I think you did review that in terms of how they physically secure their inventory would have more of a benefit. And actually, if somebody were to move their gun store to another city that's unregulated, I would almost rather have them here where we can regulate them rather than say, no, don't come to our city and go somewhere else where you can do whatever you want. I think the tip line is probably a good idea. I was also thinking around really focusing on dangerous individuals rather than focusing on the weapon also. And when we talk about tip lines, maybe we could encourage a system where people identify people that are likely to commit crimes, people that are likely to be violent, and get that information to the police so that we can maybe follow up on that. Again, I don't know the legality of us you know, following up on somebody just because their neighbors think they're crazy. But in a lot of cases, I mean, we've had you know, a recent murder here in San Bruno where somebody was bludgeoned to death and stabbed, and so I don't know that we could have prevented that one either. But it's not always the weapon, but it's you know, there are dangerous people out there, and maybe if a tip line or getting information out to people about identifying potential risks in the community, maybe that will get us closer to that goal as well. So I think that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ken?
I just want to say I agree with the mayor. I think we need to do something. It's a start. I question 500 rounds. Where did that number come from? Seems like a lot. So I think we need to study that. I think the lost and stolen program is great. I've seen the buyback program has been very successful. Hundreds of guns have been taken off out of public use. I keep hearing about background checks. How, you know, I think there's an assumption that people feel safe because there are background checks, but you know, now we're seeing that the president's promoting you know, stronger background checks. So we need to learn a lot more, but I think we do need to, you know, take a stand and start. And I believe we should endorse the resolution by Mayor Lee, and we should really start studying this because, like the mayor said, we save one life from an illegal gun. I think we're ahead.
Anyone else? Irene?
Thank you. Thank you. I have some questions along the line of Councilman Salazar as well. With the 500 rounds, if that's reported to our police station, is there going to be, or has anyone thought about a method of sharing that with everyone else? We're so close. I mean, we're across the street from Millbrae, South City. It doesn't seem like it would do much good if it's just us who knows about it. So that's, I think, how to share it, or if we share that kind of information, or if the other cities share it, that might be something to think about. The zoning and the how many gun stores and all that stuff, I think we do need to look at it. It's scary to think that there's a store with that people could access or have accessed illegally and stolen guns and what they can do with it. But the other concern I have that I didn't hear anyone mention was at-home dealers. Do we have any way of regulating people who deal guns from their homes? I know there's people who have antique collections and gun collections, but I don't know if we regulate that at all.
Yeah, so right now, gun dealers are not permitted in any zoning district in the city other than in the central business district.
Okay.
So that means they're not permitted in a residential district. So if somebody is selling guns from their home, that would not be a permitted use.
All right, that's another something that can be added to the tip line if you know somebody who's dealing with guns through their home. One of the other.
Irene, can I interject just to kind of add on to that? So, Mark, if somebody was a federally licensed gun dealer, they could legally sell a gun from their home, but not necessarily have a business license to do that. Is that accurate?
No, I think we're getting a couple of things confused. The business license is one thing. That business license doesn't really matter. That doesn't confer any right on anybody to engage in a business in a zoning district that's otherwise not permitted. So if you have a federal license to sell weapons and you're in the business of selling guns in San Bruno, you can't sell them from your home.
Okay. But would we know that?
Well, that's hard to say. Probably not unless somebody told us that. You know, we don't go around looking in everybody's window to see if they're selling guns in their home, out of their home. Okay. So it's not an activity that I think would come to our attention unless there were some crime that occurred or unless there were some report of that occurring to the police department or to our code enforcement.
I think that's an interesting point. Thank you.
Oh, okay, no problem. The other thing I would like us to either add to or think about when we are going to support the Senate and the Assembly state bills is it's great. It's something that we've all encountered. We have these wonderful laws. We have codes that we want everything to look great. We want things to happen, but we don't fund the enforcement of them. So I know there's over 300 federal laws regulating guns on the books, but I know for a fact that the funding to have the people regulate those laws has been cut over 50% in the last 8 years. So, it's like we need to put our money where our mouth is kind of thing and encourage the funding of that enforcement. I agree with Ken and the mayor. We need to do something. I mean, it is an emotional subject, but I think we can study what has been done at other places successfully and come up with some things of our own.
Rico, anything? Anybody want to speak on this item? Yeah. Yeah. Just state your name and your street, please. Thank you.
My name is James Mahan. I'm a San Bruno resident. I got married across the street in 1975. I've been around here for a while, and this is a very topic that I've been following for a while. I've been a member of a group called Legal Community Against Violence, arising out of the 101 California street shooting back in 1993, you're familiar with. And they have a wonderful source of information if you want to go on the website to get statistics on laws and what's going on. If you want to get updated. Oh, by the way, they changed their name last year. And it's stumbling over my mind. But if you Google Legal Community Against Violence, you can get this information. First point, I'll try to be brief, is I believe it's important to focus activities that will have an effect, because we have a tremendous opponent here that's well-financed and extremely well-organized, the Gun Owners of America, the National Rifle Association, that fight these things tooth and nail. So the only thing that gets through are very watered-down, weak, ineffective laws and regulations. For example, you're going to do away with hollow point bullets. That really isn't what's happening as far as really, I think, where people are being killed in the city. Sure, hollow point bullets are terrible things, but that's not what's killing people. Every day we face about 34 people dying in this country, the equivalent of the Virginia Tech massacre, day after day, and nobody cares, nobody says it, it's not on the news, you're not going to see helicopters and SWAT teams. That happens every day. And you mentioned the Sandy Hook, sure, that's terrible, but we do nothing about that. So the point being is, we should focus on resolutions that have a real effect, like the buying back the guns, et cetera. Some of these other resolutions, so the problem with it that I see is you pass them and really it doesn't affect the level of violence, and the NRA and the Gun Owners of America see, they pass laws don't protect you, you have to have the good guy with the gun to protect you. Remember, that's the argument? Okay, all right. The other point is nobody's mentioned money in this thing, really. The idea being is the effect of gun violence on us as taxpayers, on our society, where people not only are killed, but they're maimed, they're disabled for their lives, they're going to go on welfare, on assistance for the rest of their lives. We lose them as tax-paying citizens earning money. It's millions and millions of dollars we have to pay as taxpayers. So even if you're not emotionally involved in this thing, you're losing money because of this supposed right to own an AK-47. And that's something, I think, a piece of information we really got to get out to people to focus on that, saying, look, you're supposedly going to have a right to have a gun. We're losing a ton of money every day as taxpayers, et cetera, because of this supposedly sacred right that we have to have guns in this country, et cetera. So I think that's just one important factor I think should be focused on. Okay, that's about it. I want to be brief, and thank you very much. I can go on and on and on, but I don't want to keep you guys here. Thanks so much.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. Anyone else?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Ryan Mahoney, and I'm about a 14-year resident of San Bruno. And right now, I feel like I'm about the loneliest guy in the room. I am pro 2A, and I wanted to address a few issues that were brought up. If anybody is an avid shooter, the purchase of 500 rounds is absolutely nothing in scale. I'm an avid shooter. I've been shooting for over 20 years. To purchase 500 rounds is like purchasing a single box of ammo for someone that spends time going to the range and shoots for several hours at a time. So number-wise, as far as the amount of rounds, that's nothing. Okay, you can buy a 525 round brick of 22 ammo that's this big. 500 rounds of 45 ACP takes up about this much space. So I go through 300 rounds in a weekend when I go shooting. So 500 rounds as a number being reported is really kind of silly. The 9mm, the ban on hollow point ammo. Hollow point ammo is designed to stop, okay? If you know anything about ballistics, a round ball ammo is designed to penetrate. It will go through a person. 9mm ammo, which is the primary home defense round in hollow point, is designed to expand on impact and prevent over-penetration. So if you're in a close quarter environment, such as an apartment complex or whatnot, and somebody's in your house threatening to do you harm, you want hollow point ammo because it will penetrate the person, but not over-penetrate, go through walls into other people's apartments, causing more damage. So, in my personal opinion, it's a silly idea for banning hollow point because it has higher lethality. It's designed to be a man-stopping round for personal protection. Nobody buys hollow point ammo in bulk. Most ammo that is bought in bulk is purchased for target practice and for training rounds. The price of a box of 9mm ammo, I just use 9mm example, it's the most common. A box of 20 rounds of 9mm hollow point runs you about $25, where a standard box of 50 9mm ball ammo runs you about $13. So that's where you get the idea of the number of 500 rounds plus the banning of hollow point. It's kind of silly. I'm an avid shooter. I've been shooting for over 20 years. I have never committed a crime. I don't plan to. So I see no reason why we should keep enacting legislation that keeps taking away the rights of the law-abiding citizen. All the problems we have are not gun violence problems, they're people violence. Guns are just the tools. As you just said, you know, somebody was bludgeoned and stabbed. What's the next step? Do we ban hammers and knives? Yes, it's easier to do more damage with a firearm than it is most other available tools, but that's all a gun is. A gun is a tool. It's neither good nor bad. It all depends on the person that's using it. And I just feel I had to come down here and say something because I hear a lot of emotional pleas, but emotion has nothing to do, should have nothing to do with what is right and what is wrong. Excuse me. Well, you know, don't jump on a bandwagon to ban the tool when it's the person that's the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Council? Michael?
Through the chair, I wanted to ask another question. So regarding the city's ability to limit who can own a gun, do we have any say in that? If somebody has been declared mentally incompetent, if somebody is an affiliate, a gang member, for example, if somebody's committed some level of crime that the federal government wouldn't consider, I guess if you're a convicted felon, you probably couldn't own a gun, but
Right.
Can we go beyond that?
So in general, I'll take a first stab at that, and then Neil can add some of his thoughts. The laws that restrict people's ability to possess guns exist at the state level, not at the local level. And so if the state says felons can't have a gun, then felons can't have a gun. The city can't say, well, I don't know if you're convicted of a parking ticket, you can't have a gun. So that's the kind of law that the city wouldn't be able to pass. It's state law that determines if individuals who are mentally incompetent can't have guns. So all of those things in terms of who can possess are a function of state law.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And Neil, can you follow up on the last speaker's comments regarding the comments on the number of rounds or the logic around singling out hollow points?
So 500 rounds for an avid shooter. I mean, it's a lot of rounds, but if you're an avid shooter, you could go through 500 rounds over a period of time. I think it's if gun or the sale of ammunition was reported to law enforcement within 24 hours, and we knew John Smith is an avid target shooter, and we knew John Smith goes through, and we see that John Smith purchases 1,000 rounds of ammunition a month, that may not raise any red flags. If we see something come in that another individual who out of the blue purchases 500 rounds one day, a second day purchases another 500 rounds, there's something that may raise an issue. And again, as this thing, as we progress, if that's the direction that you choose, we can do a little more research and learn a little more on that. In terms of the hollow point round, he is exactly, the speaker was exactly correct. The hollow point round is designed to do one thing, stop an individual.
And in certain cases, if somebody were to use one of those rounds for self-defense, it might actually be safer for that person to only cause injuries to the person they intend to shoot rather than the person behind them or the person in the next apartment.
You're correct.
Okay, thank you.
May I?
Yes.
Following up on that question, is it more a function of the caliber of the bullet rather than
The shape of
the well, I mean, if we ban hollow points that are bigger, I think I've got the terminology right, bigger than the 9mm, then is that a better thing to do than just ban them totally, or a more effective thing to do?
I think we'd have to do a little more research because it's a combination of the round itself and the caliber of that round.
Okay, and then thinking about if somebody purchases 500 or plus rounds or whatever, if they pay cash for it, how are we going to know who it is?
The seller or the store that sells that ammunition is going to record that information, and then all the ordinance would do would be to, for the store that sells the ammunition, to provide to the police department within 24 hours the purchaser's name of that ammunition.
And are we going to require a person to show their license? I mean, if somebody walks in and goes to Big Five and purchases 1,000 rounds of 9mm round point? No, the other one. Well, thank you. And they buy all this stuff, they pay cash. I'm trying to figure out how it's going to actually physically work.
It would require the seller of that ammunition to record the purchaser's information.
Okay, and then what if they say, I don't want to do that? I mean, are we putting kind of a...
It has to be a penalty.
Yeah, are we putting a burden on the sellers? Maybe this is something that needs to be studied further. So, but thinking about it that way, the seller is confronted with somebody who's buying this ammunition. They pay cash for it, and then they say, "Oh no, I need your name and address." And they say it's John Smith on 100 Acacia, and walk away. And it's a false name, and it's not the right address. So I guess we need to keep working on it, is my question.
Rico?
I'll just go on that topic since that was last discussed. Obviously, we've already indicated that it can be ordered online. So there is no sure way of knowing exactly, and it's not always going to be recorded. There's also fake IDs, so the intent could be of the store owner to go ahead and take that information. How are we going to hold the dealer, the store dealer, that they will report that within a time frame? Do we have the resources that was brought up earlier? I think that one needs to be studied a little bit further than that, and about where we came up with the idea of 500. I do agree that whatever this council or the community wishes to do, it needs to make sense, and it needs to be able to be enforced, and we need to be able to actually achieve it. Too many times we make decisions a lot based on emotion, personal experiences, but in essence what it comes down to is making the right choices that are going to improve the situation and make things better than we're finding them today. I do agree, and it wasn't too long ago in this community, or maybe a little bit longer, that we and the prior council said 2 casinos in this town is enough, and they reviewed that. I'm okay with having staff look into, are we saying that 2 is suffice? I think we should look into the zoning aspect. I think this city and this community has looked at things like that before, and I think it would be good for us to review that again. Some of the ideas that we have from the buyback program that you have listed in here, I think, are some appropriate measures, and the security for the business and storage, liability insurance, the hearing, applying, all of those things. I think those are some positive things that this community can do. I'd like to see what we can do on a local basis, do some more investigating on some of the other comments that the council has brought up, but I would be in favor of some of those aspects that have been brought forward.
All right.
Jim, I think the speaker
Yeah.
wanted to speak again. Will you allow him to?
Yeah, make it quick though. Thank you.
Just to answer her question that she asked as far as the purchasing of the ammo, California already has a state law that requires you to be 18 years old to buy rifle ammunition, provide ID for the purchase, and be 21 to buy handgun ammunition. So you cannot just go into a store and buy ammunition without presenting some kind of identification. You have to have it. For multiple caliber items, like there are rifles that will fire handgun ammo, you still have to be of the legal age to buy that particular caliber. So if you go into a store, any store in California, to buy handgun ammo, if it can be used in a handgun, you have to show ID and be 21 years of age. If it's a rifle caliber, which there are some that will not work in any type of handgun, you have to be at least 18 years of age. And then also, most people will not go to a local gun store to buy 500 rounds of ammo because it's too cost prohibitive. Most 500 round or larger purchases will be made online because it's cheaper to buy out of state. And we also go to the gun show because there's a company that does their own factory reloads. They sell in bulk, cutting out the middleman, so it's cheaper to purchase that way. Most people will not go to a gun store to buy 500 rounds of factory ammo because it's just too expensive.
All right.
I just wanted to answer your questions.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I know you started and said you feel like one of the loneliest people in this room, but I want to thank you for coming down and giving us your insight and knowledge into this situation and the facts that you bring forward. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Maybe go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was just going to attempt to summarize what I thought I heard.
Okay. Let's see how close you
Well,
are.
we'll see if I'm on target. So I think I've heard some general support for a resolution supporting the president's plan, the one that the Conference of Mayors suggested. Is that correct, or am I missing the boat on the first one already?
I think we're all generally in favor of what the president's proposing.
All right. Of course, we'll monitor the state legislation and get back to you on that. We'll let you know how that turns out. In terms of the permit system, I've heard some general support for that, but desire to have more information and study, specifically of the San Francisco request that we ban hollow point ammunition and the 500 rounds. So is that correct?
Yeah, and I think it would be worthwhile to actually check with Mayor Lee's office and see because I'm sure they just didn't pull it out of the air, what the reasoning was behind the two criteria there.
Right,
I think
okay.
it's a good idea.
And then on the potential draft amendments to the zoning ordinance, I've heard, I think at least a majority indicating to look at those aspects, to do some further study, see what we can do. Are two gun shops that we have sufficient? If so, why? If not, why not? And as I indicated, that would ultimately wind its way to the Planning Commission first. But is there some general support for staff to look at that as part of the zoning code?
I think so.
And there is one business right now that's, or one location that's, I guess, permitted to be a gun dealer, but it's currently not operational.
That's right.
And so would any changes to the current zoning affect either of those three businesses, the two that are in operation and the one that's not? Or are we talking about absolute just net new?
It's going to depend on how long the business that is currently not in operation, whether it stays out of operation. Our zoning code provides what's called a 6-month amortization period. So if a use is discontinued for upwards of 6 months after a change in zoning, then it's determined that the use can lapse so that there's no more right to operate a legal non-conforming use anymore.
Okay. Well, if we do decide to move forward on that, I'd like to know, I'd like to have some evidence that we would be, what the expected benefit would be of limiting the gun store, especially in a economy where we don't want to have empty storefronts. If we decide absolutely no more gun stores, I'd like to know that it's going to have some positive benefit, and also I mean, anything else that we do that might impact the current businesses, that we do probe a little deeper into what the impact would be to them. If I know with the plastic bags, we decided we would charge the public a tax so that they could be compensated for tracking how many bags they were giving out. So if we're going to...
Be careful when you say tax.
A fee. Yeah, so, yeah, let's if we're going to go that route, then let's get all the data.
All right, and then I've heard some general support for looking at the voluntary programs like the buyback and the tip line. So we'll look at those things as well. Is there anything else that I've missed?
No, I think that's about it.
Thank you very much, and
All right,
thank you to members of the public who showed up to comment.
Good.